And with that, a gift. A gift. A gift of a poll that came out from CBS News this weekend. Because while I don't know whether or not I am on Santa Claus's naughty or nice list, what I do know is that when it comes to this primary season, it's been a lump of coal, at least in terms of my coin of the realm, which is interesting things happening, news to discuss, so we can then apply that to whether or not these candidates have a fundamentally sound strategy. Has not happened so far. Until now? Let me read you this CBS poll. This is for New Hampshire. Asa Hutchinson, who is bafflingly still running, despite the fact that he has been irrelevant for months, 1%. Vivek Ramaswamy, 5%. Ron DeSantis, 11%. Chris Christie, 10%. That puts Christie in third in New Hampshire. We'll get back to him in a second. But here's the top line, because it's all that matters. Nikki Haley, 29%. With Donald Trump at 44%. Now, that's about Trump's average in New Hampshire, but this is an overperformance from Haley. And one that, if it is repeated, matters. It does matter. Because Nikki Haley being within 15 points of Trump in New Hampshire could be, as Nate Silver wrote this week, her McCain moment. So let's go back in time for a little bit, okay? This is back in 2000. I think read Silver's piece on this on his Substack. But George W. Bush was also up around the 50% point nationally. And it was only John McCain's overperformance in New Hampshire by 18 points that shook up that race. It made it interesting, if not particularly competitive. We'll get to that in a second. This is John McCain enthusiastic in New Hampshire. Obviously, McCain became a national name, and spoiler alert, Bush won. I don't know if everybody knows that. I don't want to spoil it for anybody. If you're just watching on Netflix, the 2000 primary for the Republicans. Now, I know this primary really well because it was the first one that I followed as a youth. I was still in high school. I was becoming obsessed with politics. As many of you know, there were a few big moments that shaped the man that I am today. The first was the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and specifically the Star Report, as it was printed in the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel. I brought it to high school, and I was reading absolute smut. Just out and out everything that a teenage boy would like to read and had found places to read on the internet. No. This was not in some slow-to-load, dark corner of the internet. It was printed right in the paper. And when teachers would walk by, seeing me read absolute filth, they, to a man and woman, said, "You want to know what? Great job, Justin. Great job staying up to date on current events." I was lauded. Oh, I was hooked. The second thing was this primary. And here I will tell you why I got into the John McCain 2000 campaign, and I rooted for it. So here's the picture. John McCain, he doesn't want to have George W. Bush be the nominee. He wants to take a step up into national politics. He wants to present himself as a maverick. So you got to do something that breaks out of the norm. And he decides that he is going to have any journalist who wants to, probably within reason, but there were no bloggers then, so there's only X amount of people that were there. You can ride on the bus with him to all his campaign stops. Not in another bus. Not in a part of the bus that John McCain isn't in. He'll just sit there. And you can shoot the breeze with him. Now, that's going to lead to a lot more coverage than it did, but also led to some very interesting questions. And this is the question that really brought me in to paying attention to that campaign. Whether or not John McCain's then 15-year-old daughter, Meghan McCain, if she were to get pregnant, would he forbid her from having an abortion? I'm going to read you John McCain's verbatim quote. "No," Mr. McCain said, as reported contemporaneously by the New York Times. "I would discuss the issue with Cindy and Meghan, and this would be a private discussion we would share within our family. Obviously, I would encourage her to know that the baby would be brought up in a warm, loving family. The final decision would be made by Meghan with our advice and counsel, and I think that's such a private matter." Now, even my underdeveloped high school brain knew that pro-life voters drove the Republican Party. And I knew that that was not a gunmetal gray pro-life answer. It felt realistic. It felt nuanced. It felt human. And so, I rooted for the old man. I was excited when he won in New Hampshire. By the way, an adult Meghan McCain eventually did have a baby. A real one, too. Not even a hypothetical one. I remember most one moment from rooting for that campaign. And here's what it was. I was at the Chili's on University Drive in Davie, Florida, when I found out the results of the South Carolina primary that year. This was the big test for John McCain. He loses Iowa, he wins in New Hampshire, and wins big. Really scares the W. Bush campaign at that time. South Carolina was going to be the big test. Could he stay close at least, or win in a total upset in a state that was far more conservative than New Hampshire? Now, that race in and of itself, or that election in and of itself, is another podcast. There's a lot you can go into. It was marred by a lot of what are universally understood to be dirty tricks, specifically push polls that went out to South Carolinian voters asking, and I'm going to quote this one directly too, "Would you be more or less likely to vote for John McCain for president if you knew he'd fathered an illegitimate black child?" This is in reference to the fact that he had made campaign stops and had, in no way hid the fact that he had adopted a daughter from Bangladesh. Pretty dirty. Pretty dirty. Bush won South Carolina by over 10%, forging his path to the nomination. So, coming out of that specific example, let's go to a general thought. Here's the iron law of the 4 early state primaries. Put all your effort into New Hampshire and Iowa, but it's not going to do you any good to win one of those if you can't get 2. I mean, unless you're Joe Biden. In that case, you only win South Carolina, and then the entire central wing of your party totally collapses into your candidacy, and the other progressive candidate stays in the race when it's a total long shot, and therefore gives you the opportunity to consolidate power on Super Tuesday. But that's kind of rare and doesn't really happen, and probably still would have been fought against if it weren't for the fact that COVID locked everything down. So we're going to use that as an outlier and move on. You gotta win 2. At least to go into Super Tuesday with momentum, which brings us back to Nikki. Because let's say that CBS poll is right. Let's say that she is currently within striking distance of Trump in the Granite State. Here is what the Nikki Haley path would look like. you go to Iowa and you finish within 20 of Trump, and you ideally finish second. And then you declare victory. Now, that might sound weird. I lost by 20, and I spent a whole lot of money in Iowa, and I don't really have a whole lot of delegates to show for it. But remember, Joe Biden once declared victory after getting blown out by 27 points to Bernie in Nevada in 2020, simply because he didn't come in third. So you can do it. You can do it, especially if you know you've got something big coming up, the way that Biden did with South Carolina and Nikki would with New Hampshire, because this is going to be a do or die proposition in the live free or die state. Now that means she has to win New Hampshire. You can't come in second there. This has to be a John McCain situation. You have to show to the front runner that if it bleeds, we can kill it. And if that's the case, two things probably need to happen. Number one, Chris Christie, who in that poll is third to Ron DeSantis, and Ron DeSantis has not campaigned a lot in New Hampshire. He's got to drop out. And he probably has to endorse Nikki Haley before that vote happens. Also, the Ron DeSantis campaign has to be so wounded that he is either a non-factor or drops out before New Hampshire. Both of those scenarios aren't crazy. And if that happens, if Nikki is second in Iowa, if she is first in New Hampshire, then let's reset like John McCain in 2020. Because instead of South Carolina being a house of horrors demographically for McCain, as it was back then, Nikki Haley has home field advantage. Obviously, she is not leading there now. But it is far more likely that she does get a boost, especially without a Christie, especially if she gets a Tim Scott endorsement, especially if Ron DeSantis isn't viable by then to make this a contest. And if that happens, if she's able to come in second in Iowa, if she's able to come in first in New Hampshire, Nevada doesn't matter. If she is able, although Nevada will matter if Trump loses in New Hampshire. We'll get to that in a second. But that doesn't matter for this specific case because she'll have South Carolina next. If she can win in South Carolina, then you're going to have something that hasn't really existed. A mano a mano between Trump and a Trump alternative. Somebody that is very well funded, that's going to be able to stand up a lot of operations in those Super Tuesday states and make this more of a fight. Is she going to win? That would be a historic upset at this point. It would be a massive collapse for Donald Trump to squander a 50-point lead. Remember, it's something that George W. didn't do, even if he got a little bit of a heart attack in New Hampshire. Because ultimately, this is just a path. You know, it's a squint and you can kind of see it. Stretches the imagination, hopscotches of ifs, then that's, that she would have to do perfectly to make work. There are some tailwinds for her. Again, she's got a lot of money, and she'll get more if she shows electoral viability. And if Donald Trump, on some level, is buoyed by the fact that he is beating Joe Biden in swing state polls, well, Nikki Haley, in terms of electoral viability right now via those exact same polls, is great taste, less filling. She's kind of what Ron DeSantis wanted to be. Ron DeSantis initially started this campaign saying, hey, I'm Trump with better electoral viability, and now Trump's polling better than him. But either of them are polling as good as Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley makes independents think twice. Now, let's say Nikki did well. Is there any way she comes out of this process with the nomination and a docile Trump saying, you want to know what, gang? We gave it our best. 100% no. But then again, you'll cross that bridge when you come to it, if you're Haley. For now, maybe it's just a Yuletide mirage. But she might have a path, at least to make it interesting.